Somewhere along the way, adulthood became optional, because fully grown people are throwing tantrums over nothing. And that's before we get to the truly impressive meltdowns. 1. One fully grown man at a corporate workshop had a meltdown so monumental it could have been displayed in a museum under the plaque Emotional Age 4. When the facilitator asked participants to form new groups, he refused to move from his chair, gripping the armrests like he was being evicted from his own home. He declared loudly and dramatically that he had already chosen his seat and wouldn't participate in forced relocation, as if a team-building exercise were an international conflict. Colleagues attempted to reason with him, but he insisted he was being singled out, persecuted, perhaps even targeted by fate itself. He pouted, glared, and sat stiffly through the entire workshop while refusing to contribute, yet demanded he still receive credit for active presence. The irony, of course, is that adults often talk about children lacking emotional regulation, when clearly some grown humans are one seating chart away from total existential collapse. 2. A woman at a grocery store turned a small inconvenience into a full theatrical production when she discovered her favorite snack was out of stock. She approached an employee with the intimidating energy of a tax auditor and demanded they go get it from the back, insisting stores always hide inventory like it's contraband. When told the shelves were genuinely empty, she launched into a 10-minute tirade about false advertising, supply chain lies, and how she had emotionally prepared for this snack, as though she were discussing a tragic loss rather than a missing bag of chips. She then stood in the aisle dramatically sighing, looking at other customers as if expecting applause for her bravery in the face of mild disappointment. Eventually, she left in a cloud of righteous indignation, leaving behind the unmistakable aura of an adult who never learned that the universe does not restructure itself around snack cravings. 3. An adult employee reacted to a slightly earlier meeting time as if someone had personally rewritten the laws of time to sabotage him. After receiving the invite, he slammed his laptop shut, muttered about being ambushed, and stormed around the office with the intense pacing of someone preparing for a custody hearing instead of a 30-minute scheduling inconvenience. He insisted the change was a violation of his boundaries, a betrayal of trust, an orchestrated attack on his workflow, and possibly a sign of deep systemic corruption. He refused to attend the meeting, then spent the entire hour angrily reorganizing snacks in the break room like a raccoon with unresolved trauma. HR later asked him to reflect on professional communication, which is polite corporate language for stop throwing tantrums during business hours, though clearly the ICVOR message did not land. 4. A middle-aged cafe customer had a meltdown so childish it nearly required a designated babysitter. When the barista told him whipped cream cost extra, he stomped, genuinely stomped, his foot and argued that the size of his cup implied premium toppings. When told that implication is not a payment method, he walked to a table, sat down theatrically hard enough to shake the sugar packets, and typed an angry email with the furious determination of a toddler scribbling with crayons after being denied candy. He then refused to pick up his drink until a manager validated his emotional struggle, despite the fact that the struggle was entirely self-inflicted. The manager, choosing survival over logic, offered to comp the topping, at which point the man claimed, "The principle is more important now," demonstrating that for some adults, the only thing stronger than entitlement is their need to feel tragically oppressed. 5. A neighbor ignited a full-scale community feud over a plastic lawn flamingo. He marched across the street to inform the owner that the flamingo's expression was smug, claiming it stared at him with judgment every morning like some pink avian bully. When the owner refused to remove it, the man filed an actual HOA complaint, accusing the flamingo of emotional harassment. For the next week, he scowled at it daily, muttering like he was preparing for a courtroom showdown in Flamingo versus Fragile Ego. Meanwhile, the flamingo, being an inanimate object, merely continued existing, radiating the same cheerful indifference that triggered the meltdown. Nothing captures adulthood regression more accurately than a grown human losing a confidence battle to a $12 piece of plastic lawn decor. 6. A woman in an office erupted into a dramatic freeze-out when a coworker corrected a minor data entry mistake in an email thread. Instead of replying with gratitude or even mild annoyance, she declared the correction a public humiliation and responded by refusing to acknowledge the coworker's existence for 3 consecutive days. She directed questions through intermediaries, avoided eye contact like it was radioactive, and made her suffering known through elaborate sighs whenever the coworker entered the room. When her manager attempted mediation, she explained she was protecting her emotional well-being, a curious phrase to describe behavior identical to a 7-year-old refusing to talk to someone on the playground. The office moved on. She did not. She clung to her spreadsheet-related trauma like a personal mythos. 7. A man lost a friendly board game and immediately accused the rules themselves of being biased against him. He reread the instruction booklet aloud as if cross-examining a hostile witness, highlighting random sentences to prove a conspiracy that existed only in his bruised ego. When the booklet failed to apologize, which instruction manuals are notoriously bad at, he refused to continue playing, claiming the game was rigged, unethical, and designed to make him look foolish, despite the fact that no one needed the help. He stormed off, leaving the rest of the group stunned that a grown adult had experienced a full psychological unraveling over cardboard tokens and dice. It's impressive, really, how quickly losing a game can transform a person into their worst inner child. 8. A cafe customer demanded a refund for her latte because she didn't like the foam art, explaining that the leaf pattern felt aggressive and ruined her morning energy. When the barista politely offered to remake the drink, she declined on the grounds that her emotional vibration was already contaminated and proceeded to deliver a 5-minute lecture about the spiritual responsibility of baristas to honor the aesthetic needs of the customer. She left without taking the coffee, but not before snapping a picture of the foam like it was evidence in a high-profile criminal trial. Some people wake up and choose productivity, others wake up and choose needless melodrama over milk bubbles. 9. A man at an electronics store demanded a discount because the TV display wall was too bright and had assaulted his senses, claiming he couldn't be expected to shop under such hostile illumination. When the employee explained that large electronics stores tend to, shockingly, display electronics, he argued that the brightness was a targeted act meant specifically to intimidate him into purchasing a more expensive model. He then closed his eyes dramatically, extended one hand like a fainting Victorian widow, and said he needed a peaceful shopping environment free from visual violence. He left without buying anything, presumably still haunted by the traumatic memory of light existing. 10. A woman at a gym became enraged because someone else was using her treadmill, even though treadmills do not, under any known legal system, come with personal ownership rights. She stood behind the person running, checking her watch with the aggression of a landlord waiting for late rent, occasionally muttering about gym etiquette despite having invented the rule seconds earlier. When the runner finally finished, instead of using the treadmill, she stormed out because the vibe was already ruined, proving that some adults do not go to the gym for exercise but for the opportunity to feel morally offended by strangers. 11. A grown man at a movie theater threw a tantrum at the ticket counter because the film he imagined in his head did not match the film on the screen. He insisted the studio had misled his intuition, and therefore he deserved a refund plus emotional damages for narrative betrayal. He claimed the trailer spiritually promised him a different story, and that he had been tricked by dishonest creative energy. When told movies do not come with satisfaction guarantees, he paced dramatically in the lobby, shaking his head like a philosopher confronting the futility of existence. He left declaring he would never trust cinema again, a vow theater workers hear as often as weather reports. 12. A woman called a hotel front desk, demanding they make the silence stop, complaining that the quietness of her room was too loud. When asked to clarify, she explained that the absence of noise created a psychological pressure vacuum that prevented relaxation. She rejected white noise machines, music, and open windows, insisting she wanted natural background chaos, but not so much that it disturbed her. The staff eventually gave up, realizing they had encountered a paradoxical request from someone who wanted the universe to generate curated serenity on demand. It turns out adults can be extremely picky about things that do not exist. 13. One employee at a retail store threw a spectacular tantrums after being gently reminded to clock out for lunch on time. Instead of acknowledging the request, he declared the policy an attack on his personal rhythm, a phrase normally reserved for interpretive dancers, not people who fold sweaters for a living. He slammed the register closed, rolled his eyes so hard they nearly achieved orbit, and took an aggressively slow walk to the break room, stopping only to mutter that corporate America hates free spirits. His coworkers continued working. He continued sulking. After lunch, he returned with the defeated aura of someone who believed he had endured an injustice worthy of a memoir. 14. A grown woman caused a scene at a bakery because the last croissant had the wrong energy, insisting it looked smug and self-satisfied, and therefore could not possibly taste right. She demanded that the bakery fix its vibe by producing a more humble pastry, as though laminated dough possessed moral alignment. When told that croissants do not have emotions, she gasped dramatically and accused the employee of invalidating her intuitive palate. She left empty-handed, but not before glaring at every pastry in the display as though they were complicit in her suffering. 15. A man in an office refused to share a conference table during a team meeting because he felt the table belonged to him spiritually, claiming his energy had anchored to this furniture over time. Co-workers attempted to sit beside him, but he protected the empty seats around him like a dragon guarding treasure, insisting the proximity of others would disrupt his workflow aura. When his manager told him to stop reserving half the table with imaginary boundaries, he pouted visibly, slid down in his chair, and refused to take notes. Not because he couldn't, simply because he didn't want to be crowded in his sacred zone. 16. A woman became furious in a clothing store because a mannequin was wearing the outfit she wanted to try on. Instead of asking for assistance, she lectured an employee about how the display was mocking her indecision and stealing her moment, insisting the mannequin be undressed immediately. When told they could bring her the same items from the rack, she refused, claiming the mannequin had contaminated the aesthetic. She then glared at the plastic figure like it had personally sabotaged her fashion journey. The mannequin, stoic as ever, continued to stare into the void, radiating more emotional stability than the human yelling at it. 17. A fully grown adult man threw a meltdown in a hardware store because the automatic doors opened too slowly for his taste, accusing them of judging his urgency and responding with disrespect. He stood in front of the doors, waving his arms like he was directing airport traffic, demanding they recognize his presence. When an employee explained they simply operated on a sensor, he rejected this reality and insisted the doors were retaliating because he walks with purpose. Instead of simply entering the store, he spent 5 minutes arguing with machinery, losing decisively to an opponent that did not even know he existed. 18. One adult man at a family gathering managed to turn a harmless trivia game into a Greek tragedy by refusing to accept that he answered a question wrong, declaring the card biased, and insisting the manufacturers had an agenda against people who think confidently but incorrectly, then attempting to appeal the ruling to the group like he was taking his case to the Supreme Court of being right. And when everyone unanimously agreed that sitting through his meltdown was not on the evening agenda, he responded by sulking in the corner with the posture of a Victorian ghost whose haunting rights had been revoked, occasionally muttering that the real problem was society's inability to appreciate non-traditional interpretations of facts, proving that some adults don't lose arguments. They simply exit the realm of mutually understood reality. 19. One woman in an airport security line caused a bottleneck of legendary scale after discovering that her water bottle had to be emptied, not because she didn't understand the rule, but because she decided at that exact moment to protest it on philosophical grounds, claiming she should not be separated from her hydration because water is part of her identity, delivering a speech that sounded like a TED Talk no one asked for, while the people behind her contemplated the cruel fragility of the human patient's threshold. Security offered to let her step aside to drink it, dump it, or surrender it, but she refused all options, insisting the process violated her fundamental freedom to sip, until eventually she performed a dramatic, slow-motion chugging of the entire bottle while maintaining unwavering eye contact with the TSA agent, proving that even simple rules can summon Shakespearean levels of unnecessary emotional performance. 20. A man at a public library escalated a quiet misunderstanding into a full emotional opera after being politely asked to lower his voice during a phone call, claiming the request was a direct attack on his lifestyle, as if speaking at maximum volume were a protected cultural practice, then dramatically shuffling his belongings like a disgruntled wizard preparing a curse, before announcing to the entire room that he was leaving because this environment doesn't support vibrant personalities, which is a fascinating euphemism for I don't understand indoor voices. And as he marched out, he shot the bookshelves the kind of betrayed look usually reserved for ex-lovers, fully convinced he had been wronged by a centuries-old institution designed entirely for silence, not for one man broadcasting his dental appointment to 60 strangers. 21. One adult employee in a meeting discovered the profound personal devastation of not being called on first during a brainstorming session, responding by folding their arms, leaning back in their chair, and contributing nothing except deep sighs calibrated to maximum audibility, as though they were performing interpretive dance using only respiratory annoyance. When asked directly for ideas, they replied with the timeless toddler classic, "No, it's fine," in a tone that guaranteed it was absolutely not fine, and spent the rest of the meeting quietly doodling in their notebook like a moody teenager trapped in algebra. Then later, complained to coworkers that the team didn't value their voice, proving that some adults don't need conflict resolution training. They need someone to gently explain that brainstorming is not a competitive sport with gold medals for going first. 22. One woman at a clothing store erupted into a theatrical meltdown because the fitting room mirror wasn't flattering, demanding the staff adjust its honesty level, which is a request even the laws of physics decline to process. When told mirrors reflect reality, she insisted the lighting was conspiring against her and asked if the store could tilt the photons differently, a phrase that made the associate briefly question whether they were accidentally participating in a science experiment. She continued lecturing the mirror as if it could apologize, then stormed out, declaring the store hostile to beauty, leaving everyone else silently wondering how many mirrors had been subjected to her emotional turbulence before this one had the misfortune of being in her path. 23. A grown man at a restaurant childishly refused to try a new menu item because it contained an ingredient he didn't vibe with, which would have been understandable had he ever tasted that ingredient. But no, he simply disliked its energy, explaining to the server that foods have personalities, and this one felt smug, while his friends debated whether to intervene or let natural consequences take their course. When the dish arrived for someone else at the table, he stared at it with the same suspicion people normally reserve for suspicious packages, then looked personally offended when others enjoyed it, muttering that he hoped they were happy betraying him, as though refusing a vegetable were a sacred oath he expected everyone to honor. 24. One customer at a hardware store became irrationally upset that paint chips didn't perfectly match the colors in her imagination, insisting the store copy the exact shade she pictured mentally, offering increasingly poetic descriptions like sunset but confident and blue but emotional, none of which corresponded to any pigment known to chemistry. The employee, who was likely unpaid for psychic color translation, gently tried to direct her toward actual paint samples, but she pushed them away as if they were offensive imposters. She left with nothing except a belief that the paint industry had failed her on a spiritual level, and the rest of the customers left wondering how many hallucinated colors she planned to renovate her home with. 25. A man at a hotel front desk demanded a room change because the door handle felt unfriendly, claiming it had a weird vibe, like it didn't want him there. And when the clerk offered to show him a different room, he shook his head gravely like someone denying a plea deal and said he would need to inspect multiple handles before making a decision, which he did with the serious intensity of a locksmith solving a murder. After rejecting 3 rooms for emotional misalignment, he finally chose one purely because the handle felt supportive, leaving staff to wonder whether he actually slept in the room or simply communed with the hardware for the duration of his stay. 26. One adult woman caused a minor diplomatic crisis at a brunch spot after her mimosa didn't have enough bubbles for her liking, lecturing the server on the delicate art of effervescence and insisting she could taste disappointment in the fizz, a deeply concerning statement that suggests she has developed the ability to assign emotional states to carbonation. When offered a fresh one, she demanded to personally oversee the pouring process to ensure respect for the craft, hovering over the drink like a wine critic preparing to ruin a sommelier's whole career, and eventually drinking it with the solemnity of someone making a political statement instead of enjoying breakfast alcohol like the rest of civilization. 27. One guy in a co-working space threw a spectacular tantrum after discovering someone else had moved his chair, a chair owned by the building, used by the public, and identical to every other chair in the room, insisting the specific one he preferred had molded itself to his creative form, and therefore taking it was essentially theft. He spent 15 minutes interrogating strangers like a detective hunting for a stolen masterpiece, then rearranged the furniture back into what he called its natural order, which was simply a precise semicircle facing away from human interaction. Colleagues watched silently, calculating the odds that he might be one minor inconvenience away from accusing the table of betrayal. 28. A woman in a park became unreasonably upset when a squirrel approached her picnic blanket, interpreting the animal's universal desire for food as intentional harassment, yelling that the squirrel knew what it was doing and accusing it of having bad intentions, which the squirrel responded to by blinking slowly in the way squirrels always do, deeply confused about why this large, loud primate was emotional over nuts. She demanded park staff remove the squirrel for safety, apparently unaware that squirrels do not clock in for shifts nor report to a supervisor, and ultimately stormed off after the squirrel dared to exist again within her line of sight. 29. A man in a tech store threw a tantrum of Olympic proportions when a demo laptop wouldn't load a website fast enough, slapping the trackpad repeatedly like he was disciplining a misbehaving pet and insisting the device was personally disrespecting him, which is impressive considering the laptop was a floor model with the processing power of a warm potato. Staff explained that demo devices run on throttled networks, but he rejected this explanation, claiming the laptop had an attitude problem, then demanded they discipline or replace it. Somewhere in the background, a teenager testing headphones quietly witnessed the peak of adult regression. 30. A woman hosting a dinner party threw an emotional spiral because the candles she bought didn't burn at the exact symmetrical speed she expected, insisting uneven melting ruined the aesthetic balance, and questioning whether the candles were sabotaging her atmosphere on purpose, which is a bold accusation to aim at wax. She spent an hour hovering over them, rotating each candle by tiny increments like a lighthouse keeper clinging to sanity, then dramatically blew all of them out the moment one leaned half a millimeter too far, declaring the evening spiritually compromised, while her guests sat in the dark wondering if they should clap, leave, or call someone trained in delicate situations. 31. A grown man unleashed a volcanic tantrum at a gym because the bench press wasn't aligned with his energy, claiming the equipment resisted him intentionally and demanding staff recalibrate the bench to respect his athletic flow, which the employees wisely declined because they were not wizards. When another member used the same bench effortlessly, he muttered that the machine simply responded better to weaker personalities, then stormed off to the stretching mat, where he sulked so ferociously that even the yoga blocks seemed uncomfortable. 32. A woman in line at a bakery became enraged that the person ahead of her bought the last cinnamon roll, reacting as if she had witnessed a major crime, loudly accusing the customer of stealing destiny from her and insisting the pastry had been meant spiritually for her palate. The other customer apologized, which only emboldened her, and she demanded they hand over the cinnamon roll to restore cosmic fairness, a phrase that should never be applied to baked goods. The customer declined. The woman gasped as though slapped by fate, and she left the shop muttering about universal betrayal while everyone else reconsidered their breakfast choices. 33. A man at a self-checkout machine refused to scan his items because the robotic voice said unexpected item in the bagging area, and he took this personally, claiming the machine was targeting him with false accusations, lecturing it about trust issues, and demanding it retract its statement, which is a request the machine heroically ignored. He then turned to nearby staff and said the robot was slandering him publicly, leading to the surreal moment of an employee explaining to a grown adult that automated systems do not engage in psychological warfare, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. 34. A woman at a salon threw a meltdown spectacular enough to disrupt 3 hairdryers when she saw her haircut before it was styled, insisting the stylist had ruined her future because the shape didn't match the flawless version she had envisioned abstractly in her mind. When the stylist gently explained that hair settles once dry, she accused them of gaslighting her follicles, refusing to let them touch her further, and staring at herself in the mirror with the tragic intensity of someone watching their own downfall in real time. She then insisted on speaking to the manager to report emotional damage caused by premature reflection exposure, which is now officially the most dramatic thing ever said about wet hair. 35. One adult man at a public pool staged a full meltdown because a lifeguard politely told him not to run, claiming the rule was ageist and clearly meant only for children, as if the laws of traction negotiated individually with birth certificates. He then strutted around the edge of the pool with exaggerated slow-motion steps, glaring at staff like he was reenacting a courtroom drama about his right to stride boldly into danger, insisting he had excellent ankle control and therefore posed no risk to himself or humanity. Naturally, seconds later he slipped, flailed, and landed in the water with the grace of a startled pelican. then emerged furious that the lifeguard manifested the fall by doubting him, proving once again that many adults don't resent safety instructions. They resent reality refusing to bend to their delusions of invincibility. 36. A woman in a movie theater lobby escalated a concession issue into an international crisis when she realized her popcorn butter ratio wasn't perfect, loudly demanding a full rebalance of salt-to-oil dynamics, like she was chairing a UN emergency summit, while the teenage employee tried to decode her demands without triggering whatever psychological doomsday device she seemed to be carrying inside. When they offered a fresh bag, she declined dramatically, stating she had already bonded with this popcorn emotionally, yet still refused to eat it, choosing instead to parade it around the lobby like the tragic remains of a fallen soldier. She eventually threw the bag away in a gesture so ceremonious it deserved violin music, muttering about culinary betrayal, confirming that some adults don't go to the movies for entertainment. They go to stage emotional documentaries starring themselves. 37. One guy on a group hiking trip spent the entire trail complaining that nature didn't match the photos, insisting the forest was less vibrant than advertised, as if he expected the outdoors to respect influencer lighting standards. He criticized trees for standing weird, rocks for being too rocky, and even accused the wind of being uncooperative, all while tripping every 5 minutes because he refused to look at the ground instead of his mental Pinterest board. By the time they reached the lookout point, everyone else admired the scenery while he sulked because the sunset wasn't aligned with his personal aesthetic. And when a bird flew past, he declared nature was mocking him, inadvertently echoing the earlier flamingo incident and proving consistency is the one virtue shared by every adult who behaves like a toddler. 38. A woman at a petting zoo had a meltdown of poetic proportions after a goat ignored her, claiming the animal had snubbed her presence, and demanding staff explain why the goat engaged with others but not with her aura, which is an extraordinary accusation to hurl at a creature whose main focus in life is grass. She followed the goat around accusing it of favoritism, entitlement, and spiritual rudeness, while the goat, who had no idea what was happening, simply wandered toward a bucket of pellets like the professional it was. Eventually she cried because the goat refused connection, prompting staff to assure her that goats don't form social preferences based on personality, though judging by this incident, this one might have made the correct choice. 39. A man at a self-serve yogurt shop triggered an existential crisis over toppings because someone before him took the last of the crushed cookies, prompting him to declare the entire establishment philosophically flawed, as though dessert availability were proof of society's moral decay. He berated the toppings bar like it owed him money, then demanded staff restore equilibrium, a request that would have required time travel and a personal therapist. He eventually filled his cup with plain yogurt, stared at it with the bitterness of a Shakespeare villain contemplating revenge, and said, "This reflects everything wrong with the world," which is a remarkably dramatic interpretation of mild inconvenience involving sprinkles. 40. A woman at a gym yoga class accused the instructor of stealing her stretch, claiming the pose sequence-copied movement she had privately invented and therefore violated her creative rights, a concept not recognized by any legal system or muscle group. She refused to participate in the next pose, crossing her arms and sitting on her mat like a preschooler refusing to join circle time, then lectured the class on movement plagiarism while everyone else tried to reclaim their inner peace. When the instructor gently reminded her that yoga has existed for thousands of years, she said, "Not the way I do it," proving once again that adult ego has no natural predators. 41. A man at a theme park threw a tantrum so impressive it deserved its own parade because he was half an inch too short for a roller coaster, insisting the height requirement was negotiable if he believed in himself, and demanding a manager who could override physics with empathy. When told that safety restraints do not derive their power from emotional validation, he began measuring his hair with his hands, trying to determine if styling gel could grant him the missing fraction, then paced in circles announcing he was being discriminated against for being compact and powerful, causing a crowd of children, who accepted their height limitations with far more dignity, to watch him like an educational documentary on maladaptive adulthood. 42. One woman at a coffee shop became enraged when her name was misspelled on the cup, claiming the error was an attack on her personal brand, and demanding staff correct it with a level of precision normally reserved for government IDs. When the barista rewrote it, she rejected the fix because the handwriting lacked intention, then delivered a 5-minute speech about identity, self-worth, and the importance of typography and emotional expression. Meanwhile, her coffee sat untouched, growing colder by the second, which felt symbolic of something but definitely not in the profound way she imagined. 43. A man in a mall food court accused an escalator of humiliating him because it hesitated a moment before moving, loudly insisting it detected insecurity in his step and was commenting on his confidence, which is a remarkable thing to attribute to a machine designed specifically to move people without thinking about them. He demanded a technician examine it for bias, lectured nearby shoppers about mechanical disrespect, and refused to get on until he felt recognized, creating an accidental philosophical standoff between human pride and a staircase with electricity. 44. One adult woman on a flight demanded to speak to the pilot because the clouds outside felt ominous, explaining that she didn't want to travel through emotionally negative weather, a phrase that made the flight attendant reconsider every career decision they had ever made. She insisted the plane reroute around the clouds entirely, as though commercial aviation were a customizable scenic tour and not a physics-based endeavor. When gently informed that clouds do not contain moods, she said she could sense tension in their shapes, which made the rest of the passengers suddenly grateful. Planes don't have eject buttons for non-emergencies. 45. A man at a car dealership threw a toddler-grade tantrum when the sales rep told him his credit didn't qualify for the luxury model he wanted, accusing the car itself of rejecting him spiritually and refusing to consider cheaper options because they didn't align with his inner winner. He then delivered an inspirational speech to the showroom about perseverance, all while financing data sat on the desk disproving every word. When he stormed out, he slapped the hood of a display vehicle as though scolding a pet, proving adulthood does not automatically come with emotional horsepower. 46. A woman at a hotel buffet started a minor riot because the waffle maker had a line, declaring it a human rights violation that others were allowed to cook their breakfast before she could cook hers, and then attempted to enforce her own unofficial number system that no one agreed to follow. She lectured the crowd about etiquette, fairness, and prioritizing those with refined breakfast palates, a category she placed herself in without measurable criteria. When someone finally took a waffle before her, she gasped like she had witnessed treason, making it abundantly clear that democracy dies not in darkness, but at the continental breakfast. 47. One man at a museum accused a wax figure of mocking him because its pose reminded him of his boss, which triggered a spiral of emotional dramatics usually reserved for mid-season soap opera twists. He insisted the figure be repositioned, covered, or removed because he didn't pay to be psychologically attacked, while families quietly guided their children away from the spectacle. Museum staff attempted to explain that wax figures are famously non-sentient, but he refused to accept this, claiming the figure knew exactly what it was doing, proving some adults cannot mentally differentiate between art, symbolism, and their own fragile egos. 48. A woman at a wedding reception caused chaos because she didn't catch the bouquet and declared the toss rigged, insisting the bride manipulated the trajectory to sabotage her romantic destiny. She demanded a retoss, complete with neutral officiating and a fair distribution radius, which is exactly the kind of bureaucratic nightmare weddings desperately try to avoid. When no one took her seriously, she accused the bouquet catcher of hoarding love energy, a phrase so cosmically unhinged it temporarily stunned the DJ into silence. 49. A man in a perfume store got into a heated argument with a fragrance tester strip because he didn't like how the scent smelled on paper, insisting the paper was biased against him and not giving the cologne a fair emotional canvas. When an employee suggested trying it on his skin, he refused because the paper had already ruined the experience, proving that some adults can create interpersonal conflict with objects incapable of malice or scent preference. 50. A woman on a video call refused to mute herself despite loud construction outside her window, claiming muting silenced her presence and diminished her leadership energy, forcing her coworkers to choose between migraine-level drilling or the risk of her emotional fallout. When asked a second time, she claimed everyone else should mute instead out of respect, demonstrating the extraordinary narcissistic aerobics some people perform just to avoid pressing a single button. 51. One grown man in a supermarket had the final glorious meltdown to end all meltdowns when the automatic checkout voice reminded him to take his change, causing him to scream that he would take it when he was emotionally ready, and accusing the machine of rushing him through a delicate financial moment. He lectured the kiosk about boundaries, communication, and mutual respect, all while a line of customers watched the world's first breakup between a human and a cash dispenser. When he finally grabbed his coins, he announced triumphantly, "I decide the timing," which was the perfect accidental summary of this entire list. Adults who believe maturity is optional, logic is negotiable, and emotional readiness is somehow a universal scheduling requirement. After all that, I think it's safe to say adulthood is wildly overrated, especially when so many people are out here filing emotional lawsuits against reality. Now go vote in the comments for the dumbest meltdown, or add your own catastrophe to the pile. And if you survived this tour of human chaos, hit like and subscribe so we can dive even deeper into the madness next time.